There we go. Okay, so first of all, if you have questions at any time, please use the chat, the keyboard chat, or the Q&A. They're both keyboard chat. Interrupt me at any time if you have a question about a particular slide, and I've already gone on to another slide. Ask the question anyway, and I'm happy to go back. So let's proceed. So what are we going to talk about today? We need to talk about a bit more than just focusing exclusively on how to change your resume as someone who is making a career transition. We need to talk a bit about the context in which that occurs, okay? So we're going to discuss who is a career transitioner, how to intelligently and carefully review your current skill set as it applies to where you want to go. We're going to discuss certain aspects of career path planning. And then most importantly, in terms of what I think all of you came here for, repackaging yourself in your resume, how to do that most effectively. How to use something called the professional skills profile section in your resume, which I think is a key vehicle for people making a career transition. And you'll understand more about that when we get to it, and I'll show you an example of what that should look like. For those of you who are graduate students, which should be most of you, there may be some of you who are older undergraduates who maybe stopped going to school and came back. Happy to have you here this evening. We're going to discuss the subject of whether or not you need to take a step back in your career and go for an internship, or should you be going immediately for a new job? A little bit about the financial implications of all this, because there are financial implications, and some of them can be quite serious. Questions that you should be asking yourself, and what comes up next. So, first of all, who is a career transitioner? I have a very arbitrary definition, and I'm happy to have you disagree with it. I generally feel it's someone who has been or is pursuing a career path, has been for a path they've been on for about 3+ years, and now they want to change, okay? They're seeking a major change. These are the kinds of people that I've run into at various times. A high school teacher who wants to work in international development, a marketing executive who wants to shift into public health, someone who has been an office manager and wants to enter the federal government, or maybe state government, or possibly even municipal government. Just some ideas about what that means in terms of being a career transitioner. So the first thing you need to do before you start trying to rewrite your resume is to look very closely at your skill set, okay? What elements of your existing skill set are relevant and are transferable to your future desired career path? These are the kinds of things that we in career advising describe as transferable skills, okay? Research and analytical skills, quantitative skills, obviously writing and editing, any foreign languages, particularly if they're going to be relevant to the career you want to go into, various kinds of software, and I'm talking about anything other than Word and PowerPoint, which is kind of accepted that everybody's got. I don't mention Excel because strong Excel skills, advanced Excel skills, can be a real point of appeal for you when you're trying to make a career transition. Do you have management experience, or at least coordinating experience, okay? Have you been working abroad, and are you looking toward an international career? Do you have region-specific expertise? In particular, I'm talking not about regions of the US, but regions of the world, mostly. Do you have experience in budget planning, budget tracking, budget evaluation? This is transferable in a lot of different contexts in terms of career transitions. Do you have experience dealing with contracts? Not necessarily as a lawyer, but in a less legalistic way. There are a lot of people who are involved with contract drafting and contract monitoring. Have you ever been involved with grant writing or research regarding grant writing? Mostly in a nonprofit context, of course. And what kind of volunteer experience do you have that might be relevant to your future career? You should even be looking at that. So what's the objective in thinking about career path planning as part of your transition? How are you going to empower yourself to make the best impact, the maximum impact in the job market? I suggest that you do a personal SWOT analysis. Those of you who are familiar with strategic planning know what SWOT, it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what I suggest is that you think about what are your strengths entering the job market, in the new job market that you want to get into. What might be the weaknesses? What might be holding you back now, but possibly could be addressed? What opportunities are there likely to be in the new job market that you want to go into? And what are the threats that you might face in your career transition? Think carefully about these things and how you're going to maximize your strengths, address your weaknesses, take advantage of the opportunities, and overcome the threats. Now, that sounds easy. I said that in about 10 seconds. It requires a lot of careful thought and could be the subject of a good lengthy discussion with a career advisor, for example. Also, more on career path planning. What is it that motivates you? Do you want to make the world a better place? Is the prestige of a job that you would have important to you? Is the power or the authority that you would have important? Do you want to make more money? I mean, most people do, but how important is that? Is money the overriding goal? All depends. What about influence? You know, are you going to be able to influence things externally from the job that you are in your new job, that is? Is job security a really important factor for you, or are you someone who might be willing to take a certain amount of risk, reasonable risk, to advance your career? How important is work-life balance for you? Are you someone with a family? Do you have children? Even if you don't, are you planning to do that? Or even if you intend to live your whole life as a single person, how important is it for you to have time to yourself? Some people, you know, are workaholics and actually are happy at that, but a lot of other people are not. So again, these are things to think about in terms of what are your motivators going into a career transition. Also, you need to think about what the actions are. After you've thought about all those other things I just mentioned, you need to make a plan of sorts, whether it's just in your head. I would actually say it ought to be written down somewhere. What are you going to do over a specific period of time that is going to make your transition more possible? Okay. Yes, you're going to rebuild your resume and you're going to revise it significantly. Are there certain kinds of skills training or software training or other kinds of training in things like project management, for example? Are there certain kinds of training that you need to get aside from for example, graduate degree that probably many of you listening this evening are working on already? And then how are you going to get a career relevant job? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, right? So also, where do you want to live? How likely is it you're going to be able to pursue what you want to do where you're living now? If it's a career that is easily pursued within the DMV, the Washington, D.C. metro area, that's fine. If not, are there other places where you'd rather live? I mean, I had someone who went through a career path planning process with me, and her overwhelming goal was to work in international development, but the only place she wanted to live was Madison, Wisconsin, which is not the best place in the world to do international development. And this was pre-pandemic, so things were different in terms of working remotely, but even now that would be a difficult path to pursue. She obviously had strong personal reasons for wanting to be in Wisconsin, but you know, I had to point out that, well, there's a conflict here and you've got to resolve it somehow in terms of where it is you want to be. You also may want to be thinking about, again, as part of your transition, 5 to 10 employers that you want to specifically target and monitor over time as to how they're hiring and what opportunities are there for you. You also need to think about at least 5 skill gaps or experience gaps that you have and how you are going to address those through a graduate program, through potentially an additional academic certification, through additional software training. There's a lot of different ways to go with this, and they could be pursued in a number of different ways. Now, let's get to resumes, okay? First of all, you need to think about the idea of ruthlessly editing your resume. Otherwise, if you want to leave in everything that's already there, you know, you could end up with a 3 or 4 page document and no one's going to read it. It's a bad idea, okay? You're going to need to delete some irrelevant content and add new content. That doesn't mean you're going to delete every job you've had up to this point or every internship you've had that doesn't have any relationship to where you want to be, because then, you know, you could look a little bit empty in terms of what you've been doing career-wise up to now. I strongly advocate for creating what I call a professional skills profile at the top of the first page of your resume. I'll show you an example in a moment. What does this career skills profile do? It's very short. It's in 2 columns with very, very short bullet points, again, in 2 columns. And it emphasizes the skills relevant to your future career path. A lot of the transferable skills that I mentioned several slides earlier, okay? You wanna also think about in your resume, dividing up your experience. Now, you know how in resumes, we all feel that we're locked into what I call the tyranny of reverse chronology, that you gotta have your most recent internship or job at the top, and then you work backwards from there in time. And the problem is what you're doing now may have very little relationship to what you want to be doing. But on the other hand, maybe 2 jobs ago or a couple of internships ago, maybe you were doing something that was a lot more relevant. So what you can consider doing, this is not for everybody. I advocate that you all think about a professional skills profile, but in terms of dividing up your experience into 2 sections, one called relevant experience, obviously that's going to be on top of another section called additional work experience, something like that. And here's the thing, what is relevant? It's whatever you want it to be, okay? In terms of previous jobs, previous internships, even volunteer experience, okay? Could come under relevant with the additional work experience coming underneath that. It frees you from, again, this tyranny of reverse chronology to some degree. Also, you want to think about adding descriptive bullet points under each and every job or internship you've had that emphasize transferable skills that are relevant to your future career, and descriptive bullet points that talk about relevant background, relevant knowledge, relevant skills, okay? Focus heavily, because it's really important for employers, on outcomes and quantitative results in the jobs and internships that you've had. This is especially important if you want to work for the federal government, or state government, municipal government, or government contractors. Also can be important for some nonprofits. So what is an outcome? An outcome is that you had an internship and you were part of a 3-person team that produced a 75-page research paper. Maybe your resume at this point just says, produce a research paper on such and such a subject. No, you want to say 75 pages. That's the quantitative result. Now, individually, each of these quantitative changes may seem quite small and irrelevant, but if you can add several of them to the resume, cumulatively, they will make an impact. In addition, outcomes. Okay, this is an outcome. You're working at a job now, and you, again, I hate to keep using this research analogy, but you participated in a particular piece of research that was eventually published online somewhere, whereas maybe your resume now just says contributed to such and such research project. What was the outcome? It was published online. There are a lot of those kinds of outcomes. In a business context, in a nonprofit context, in a government context, in a federal or government contractor context, you can always be enhancing your resume in that way, and particularly in ways that make the resume and you, therefore, more appealing to future employers. Okay. Now let's talk about professional skills profile. So this is an example of how it might look, okay? So your name and your contact information is going to be at the top of the resume, as always it should be. Then we go to the professional skills profile. Remember I said 2 columns, right? Bullet pointed. And this is an example of a real person from a number of years ago whom I advised. And you know, this skill set may have no relevance to you, but think about the way in which this person was outlining her skills in terms of the career transition she was trying to make. This was someone who, if I remember correctly, was a high school teacher who wanted to get into international development work and wanted to be working internationally. She already had a lot of really good skills for getting into that. She had developed strong ability to speak Spanish and French, had excellent research and analytical skills, had a little bit of internship experience on Capitol Hill, data analytics, had experience with SPSS and Stata. She had spent a couple of semesters, if I remember correctly, working in Central and Latin America with local nonprofits and local community. Also, at one point in her life, had developed some skills with regard to Adobe and Microsoft Publisher and some other things. Talked about her.
Someone is at the front door.
Well, I'm not going to answer that door. Someone who experienced really very experienced in conducting literature reviews and in-depth knowledge. In this case, she wanted employers to know that she had some specialty in gender and micro enterprise projects within international development. That's really specialized, and not something that's going to be that relevant to all of you. But this gives you an idea of how this person does this. Now, how long should the professional skills profile be? My suggestion is that you have what I would call a core resume, okay? You might have 20 bullet points, 10 on each side, but you're never going to submit a resume with a skills profile of 20 bullet points. I've played with this in terms of how it looks on resumes. My recommendation is that you stop around 14 bullet points, which would be seven on each side, and without it overwhelming everything else in the resume. And by the way, why a professional skills profile? There's a number of reasons aside from the fact that obviously it enables you right at the top of the resume to highlight the skill set, the experiences you've had that are relevant and transferable to the career that you want to have. It also gives employers an at-a-glance look at you in a way that's designed to get them to read the rest of the resume, and possibly even right there and then, looking at the skills profile, deciding, oh, let's put her aside. Meaning, probably, they're looking at your resume on a screen and they're going to print it out, okay? That's the way most employers work in this. And then eventually, they've gone from, let's say, 100 applicants to maybe a dozen applicants. They most likely will not interview 12 people unless they're hiring more than one person for the same job. Let's say they have 2 vacancies or 3 vacancies or whatever. But if it's only a single vacancy, which of course it usually is, then what they're going to do is more carefully, slower than the usual 100-mile-an-hour resume review of when they're looking at the 75 or 100 resumes, then say, okay, of these 12 people, how many do we really want to interview? 5, 3? That's 3, 4, 5, usually the number that ends up getting interviewed. Sometimes larger employers will do phone interviews, 15 minutes with a human resources person to gauge certain basic things about you. Is the salary level okay? Are you still available for the job because you applied 3 weeks ago and we don't know whether you're still available? Things like that. They may call 12 people on the phone for a 10, 15-minute chat, but in terms of a real interview, typically it's 3, 4, 5 people. And so this really helps you get over the hump of the first level of screening. Most people think of the hardest part about getting a job as being the job interview, which of course, personally, it always is. But really the hardest part about getting a job is going from a large number of people, 100, 200, 250, whatever it is, down to a much smaller number of people who are actually going to get a more intensive review, and then a smaller number still who are even going to get interviewed. Okay, that's the hardest part, and that's the first level of review. And the frustrating part of it is you're not there. You've submitted your resume, you've submitted your cover letter, and you're waiting for a response. Sometimes it's quick, and a lot of times it isn't, because a lot of employers kind of drag their feet on hiring. They've got 20 other things they'd rather do than deal with looking at a bunch of resumes. So that's the way a professional skills profile work. I will tell you, I have been, I've been at AU, about 13 years now. I learned perhaps about 10 years ago about this concept of professional skills profile by reading about it from another career advisor somewhere else in the country who had thought this up. And I thought, what a great idea. And I adapted it into a fact sheet and into this presentation. And I will tell you that uniformly in the decade or so since I've been advising people to use this, and by the way, not just career transitioners, but also people who have a lot of experience, even seniors who might have a lot of internships, who need that kind of summary at the top to focus an employer's attention, okay? And by the way, one other thing I failed to mention a moment ago, this skills profile should be customized for every single employer. Now, from one job to another, if you're applying to relatively similar jobs, it might not change that much. But you want to think about customizing it. You want to think about changing the order of the bullet points. You want to think about having that core of 20, let's say, bullet points, and then cutting it down to 12 or 14 or so that you're actually going to use for a particular employer. That's customization of this, okay? And as I say, I've had experiences with recent alumni, for example, over the years, who come in after 3-6 months after graduation and say, I'm just not, I've applied to 75 jobs and I've only gotten 3 interviews and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And if they have enough experience, I recommend this professional skills profile concept. And uniformly, typically within a matter of a couple of weeks, they start getting interviews. And their response is that it's almost like magic that this started happening. So I can tell you that it works. Obviously, it's going to work really well for some people and not as well for other people, depending upon how aligned your skill set is with your future career, depending upon what your overall skill set and experience set is. But it really does work. Okay, so enough on that. If anybody has questions about this, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, because I am going to keep going. So I may have already explained most of what I discussed on this part of the slide. Yeah, so think about, let's look at that series of bullet points there. What are you going to talk about in a professional skills profile? Functional skills, such as research and writing, oral communication, etc. Specific kinds of software, data analytics, advanced Excel skills, other things, foreign language skills, okay? Knowledge or expertise of a relevant subject matter. You're applying to an employer who wants someone who knows something about West Africa, and you know something about West Africa, so there's going to be you're going to emphasize that as relevant subject matter in your skills profile. Experience living and working in relevant places, whether it's part of the United States or other parts of the world, okay? Or certain parts of the country that are not region specific. Maybe you're applying for a job with an organization that deals with urban problems for disadvantaged populations in some way. And maybe you've done that kind of work maybe you were with AmeriCorps or other organizations that do that sort of work. Then you want to explain that you've done that and you've lived in some of these kinds of communities. Another important thing, going back to the 2 columns of bullet points, keep the bullet points short. Don't keep going on and into several lines of text. The bullet points should be short. Most of the time, they should not be more than about 5 or 6 words, okay? So that's the skills profile, the key part of revising your resume. Now, if you're early in your graduate studies, or maybe you're an older undergraduate, what you want to be thinking about in terms of your graduate studies is working very closely with your academic advisor to plan a course of study that is going to build your credentials for a new career path. Also think about certificates. There's a number of certification courses that are offered in different schools. I'm familiar with the ones in School of Public Affairs. It's not going to be relevant to all of you listening this evening. And there's ways of doing that. There are also certificates you can get in other places. For example, certification in certain types of software. There's a certification in advanced use of Microsoft Excel. You might be able to get that kind of a course at a local community college for not very much money, okay, to pay in terms of the tuition or the fee involved. All right, so think about that. Also, you want to be consulting with professors to some degree. Okay, make yourself, this is the point, is to make yourself a stronger candidate with coursework that emphasizes quantitative skills also, as well as courses that build easily on areas of expertise that are quite clear. Why are quantitative skills important? They're important for most career paths. I mean, not everything, okay? But for a lot of career paths, particularly in the social sciences, quantitative skills, data analytics, regression analysis, stuff like that are becoming more and more and more important. I've seen this come from being a little bit important, 13 years ago when I joined AU, and to the job descriptions I look at now that are where quantitative skills are hugely important for many, if not the majority of job descriptions that I look at, particularly for people in the School of Public Affairs. So, financial implications. What does this all mean? Maybe you're working in a career now where you're making a fair amount of money and you're thinking about doing something else that's going to result in you taking a step back because maybe you're only qualified for an entry-level job in your new career path. I'm throwing this page up from Glassdoor just as an example. It's not meant to mean that you all have to earn $48,000 a year, which might seem like a lot of money to some of you and not much money to others of you. All depends on what you're doing right now. But by the way, you can, a reason for showing this is you can research fairly effectively the kinds of salaries you're looking at in different cities for different kinds of jobs. Here is, I went into Glassdoor, and they're the best place to do this, by the way, is glassdoor.com. I looked at consulting, meaning really management consulting, in a medium-sized employer with up to 200 staff, looking for someone who has 1 to 3 years experience, which means not that much experience, where you could reasonably make an argument, for a job. And the average base pay in this area in DC is going to be, close to $49,000 a year. And as you see from their little bar chart that they've got here, it's almost a bell-shaped curve where, a certain number of people are making a bit less than that, a certain number are making more than that, but most people in the middle there are making close to $49,000, almost $50,000 a year. This is the way you can start to figure out what is it I'm looking at. I mean, I remember someone who was a senior executive with a federal contractor in town who came to AU maybe 8 years ago to talk to students about what her company does. And it was kind of a recruiting thing. And then she spoke privately with a couple of us who were career advisors and said she has no work-life balance, she's got young children, and she really would like to change her career. And she was thinking about becoming a career advisor. And we actually happened to have an opening at that time for someone who, given her skill set, she might have been a viable candidate. Then we told her what a career advisor makes. And she was making about $300,000 a year. And, her jaw dropped when she realized the tremendous drop in income she would have to take. She was used to making $300,000 a year, sending her kids to private schools, the whole 9 yards, the tennis camps and all that stuff. And she wasn't willing to give it up. So that was the beginning and the end of her candidacy in the course of about a 10-minute conversation. Now that was an extreme one. Doubtful many of you are in that income category, if any of you. But you do have to think about that. Am I going to have to take a step back? And how quickly can I recoup and move up? There are certain kinds of careers where mobility can come really fast, especially if you're a little bit older, a bit more mature, you know how to handle yourself better in the office, or in this case, in many cases, remotely these days. You might have reasonable expectations of moving up fairly fast. But is there going to be that fallback, that drop back in income particularly, and maybe a bit in prestige too, in terms of the kind of job you're working, to make that career shift? So it's something to think about. Finally, questions you need to ask yourself. How abrupt is this career transition? That's kind of what I was getting at in the previous slide. Am I going to need to take a step back in salary? Or am I going to have to take a step back in the prestige or the level of the job I have? Maybe I'm a manager or a director right now, and I'm looking at an entry-level job, or maybe an associate level job that's a little bit above entry level. And is that what I need to do to start my new career? And can I really do that? Career advisors are available to help you work your way through those issues, by the way. Also, of course, and this is what we've been mostly talking about this evening, how much can I use elements of my current career as building blocks for my future path? And I mean that not just on your resume, which we've talked a lot about, but also, can I make an argument for my new employer in a new career path? Can I make a reasonable argument for coming in at a bit higher level than entry level? That's also quite possible, depending upon circumstances and your skill set. And then finally, and most importantly, how can I persuasively market myself for jobs that an employer thinks maybe should go to somebody who's younger, or maybe someone who has been more singularly focused on their career choices, as opposed to you wanting to make a career shift? Okay, these are tough questions, but stuff that you really need to be asking yourself. And I think, no, this is the last slide. So what's next? Assess those transferable skills, okay? See an academic advisor and a career advisor, particularly career advisor. And by the way, I'm only advising seniors and graduate students and recent alumni in the School of Public Affairs, okay? So can't see me unless you're within that group. There are dedicated career advisors for all the AU schools. If you're in the School of International Service, they have their own career center. COGOT has its own career center. The law school, I'm not sure they even saw the notice of this webinar, but if you're in the law school, they certainly have their own career center. So, check out your relevant career advisor. If you don't know who that is, contact the AU Career Center front desk at 202-885-1804, 202-885-1804, and they'll tell you. They answer the phone between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Mondays through Thursdays, okay? 202-885-1804. And so then, after you've done that, again, you're going to repackage your resume and go through all the steps I mentioned, doing it very carefully and professionally, and plan that transition to a new career path, and then begin applying, mostly for jobs. Internships might be, maybe for some of you, but probably not, jobs that are going to be relevant to making that transition. So that's the presentation this evening. It's relatively short. We've been at this for about 36 minutes. If you've got any questions, ask them now, because I don't want to just hang around talking when I don't have anything more to say. I will tell you this: if you want to ask me questions directly, because you just didn't want other people to see the questions, I'm going to type my email address into the chat. So it's robert.sangeorge@american.edu. My first name, my last name at American. Okay. I don't write memos, so if it's a really long question, and if you're in the school, if you're related to School of Public Affairs, I'll be happy to do an appointment with you. Otherwise, I could probably direct you to whatever career advisors you should go to if you're associated with a different school at AU. So yeah, let's wrap it up. And thank you for listening. I hope this has been useful. And good night and good luck.